My name is Kenzie, and I'm the outreach manager for the Better Food Foundation. For this video, I will be discussing how we can cultivate sustainability by default with Default Veg. I will help you understand what Default Veg is, how it works, and the strategies that can be used to implement it. Default Veg is an easy, research-based strategy that helps institutions, businesses, festivals, and restaurants offer healthier and more sustainable meals. A default veg menu makes plant-based food the default option while giving diners the choice to add or opt into meat or dairy upon request. Simply by changing the default, consumers are more likely to choose a plant-based meal even when meat and dairy options are available. So the concept is simple. We're looking to flip the norm. Right now, just about everywhere, meat is the default, and people have to specially opt into veg options, which usually only strict vegetarians and vegans put in the time and energy to do. We are looking to flip that, to make plant-based the default and give people the choice to opt into meat and dairy. This way, everyone has complete freedom of choice. Nothing is taken off the menu, but more sustainable choices are the default. This strategy is flexible. It can be implemented in any environment where food is served, and it is also cost neutral and can even save money. It's also more inclusive. So knowing you can sit down with coworkers and enjoy a meal that's delicious, nutritious, and meets your dietary needs is a powerful form of inclusivity. Serving plant-based foods with the option to add meat and dairy includes everyone by default. It includes the 30 to 50 million Americans who are lactose intolerant, the majority of whom are people of color. It includes Buddhists, Hindus, Jains, Sikhs, Rastafarians, Seventh-day Adventists, and more who may be vegetarian, and Jews and Muslims who do not eat pork. It also includes young people who are eating more plant-based foods and communities of color. Black Americans are actually more than twice as likely to be vegan as white Americans, and a third of Americans of color reported reducing their meat consumption in the past year compared to a quarter of Americans overall. This is also an extremely effective strategy. A study conducted at a series of conferences in Denmark looked at the impacts of defaults on meal choice. When meat was the default and people could request a vegetarian option, on average, 94% of people stuck with the meat and only 60% requested vegetarian. But when vegetarian was the default and people could request meat, an average of 87% of people stuck with the veg and 13% opted into meat. An 80% increase in veg meals served simply by making them the default. Better yet, attendees had positive feedback about the food. So if menus had been entirely vegetarian, then the roughly 13% of people who went out of their way to request meat likely would have complained. But because meat is still available, hardcore carnivores' needs are met, while the vast majority of people are happy to stick with the veg default. So what does this actually look like in practice? Next, we'll talk about strategies that can be used to implement plant-based defaults in different types of food service settings. So making your base plant-based. The core concept of this strategy is to make the base of your meal plant-based and give people the choice to opt into meat and dairy. If people are RSVPing to an event like a conference, it can be a very clean switch. Just state that the food will be plant-based by default and offer a box to check to request meat, the same way that people would request a vegetarian or gluten-free meal. If food is served buffet or family style, offer the plant-based entree first and meat and dairy at the end of the line. That way, people will naturally fill up their plates with the plant-based options, and meat and dairy will be garnish rather than the bulk of the meal. If people are choosing from a set menu, make the base entirely plant-based and offer meat and dairy as add-ons. This is already common for salads and bowls where the base is veg and you pay extra to add meat. So the next is climate-friendly ratios. So when it's not possible to make the base entirely plant-based, you can create the perception of plant-based as the default by offering a minimum ratio of 2-to-1 veg to meat options. A recent study found that when 3 out of 4 options are meat based, only 12% of people choose the veg option. But when 3 out of 4 options are veg, about half of people will choose a veg option. This is because when there's only one veg option, omnivores perceive it as the veg option as for vegetarians. So if I'm not a vegetarian, I might think that's not for me. And it can even be altruistic. At many companies, the veg option runs out, so vegetarians go hungry if an omnivore takes a veg meal. Whereas when there are several different veg options, suddenly it becomes about whether I want the black bean enchilada, the chickpea curry, or the mushroom risotto. And it's all about flavors and what I'm in the mood for that day rather than whether I identify as vegetarian. So the next is subtle substitutions. So subtle substitutions are another easy and effective strategy. So serving plant-based condiments, milks, desserts, and breads by default. This strategy is inclusive. This is more inclusive because it meets the needs of those with allergies and dietary restrictions who are otherwise left without creamer for their coffee or trying to make a lettuce wrap when they really wanted a sandwich. It is indistinguishable. So nowadays the products are so good that people won't even notice the difference. We worked with one university that trialed a vegan brownie and found that in blind taste tests, students actually preferred the taste of the vegan brownie. Plus, it was cheaper for them to make, had a lower carbon and water footprint, and more students were able to eat them. So it's a win-win-win-win. It's also inexpensive. So if you're baking in-house, it's cheaper too. So for example, using oil for cookies and brownies instead of butter. When there's a printed menu, ensure that plant-based options are incorporated into the main menu and the first option in each section is plant-based. This simple change can increase selection of plant-based items by 56%. That's because if I'm an omnivore looking at the menu on the right, I see the vegetarian section and think that that's just for vegetarians, so I'll stick with the normal menu. I don't even look at the options in the vegetarian section. But when they're incorporated into the main menu and listed first, I glance at the menu and see the ricotta and spinach ravioli, and it sounds delicious, so I order that. I might not even notice that it is in fact vegetarian. Another impactful strategy is labeling foods with names that are focused on taste, texture, and provenance, rather than labeling them vegetarian, vegan, meatless, low fat, or healthy. So some people think that vegan means less delicious and less filling, and others think that it's just for vegans. So we worked with a software company, and after seeing this presentation, they changed the name of their vegetarian hummus wrap to a roasted red pepper, avocado, and hummus wrap. The sales immediately increased. Another way to think of this is imagine if you're looking at a menu and saw an item called a celiac bowl. You possibly wouldn't order that unless you had celiac disease or are gluten-free. But if you saw a Thai peanut noodle bowl, you might order it because it sounds delicious and not even think about the fact that it is gluten-free. Same goes for vegetarian and vegan. A social media company we worked with implemented climate-friendly ratios and a taste-focused labeling in their California office. As a result, they were able to serve half as much meat per person while maintaining high diner satisfaction. They also implemented an oat milk default at their coffee bar, cutting dairy milk from 70% to 18%. The New York City Health and Hospitals piloted a plant-based chef special as the default patient lunch option and found that more than half of all eligible patients opted in. Approximately 95% of patients who chose the plant-based option were satisfied with their choice. The program is so successful that they expanded it into dinners. So if an average city follows in New York City's footsteps by serving plant-based meals by default, it can expect to cut its food-related emissions by 40% and water footprint by 24%. A city serving 1 million meals per year could save the equivalent emissions of driving a passenger car over 1 million miles and the equivalent water of 4 million showers. When Sodexo implemented plant-based defaults at 3 universities, it was found that on control days, only 26% of dishes served were plant-based, and on plant-based default days, an average of 57% of dishes served were plant-based. At Tulane and Lehigh University, specifically, which implemented plant-based defaults consistently, the proportion of plant-based dishes served on plant-based days jumped to 81%. And it was calculated that the food-related greenhouse gas emissions declined by 23.6% with this strategy. This approach can work in any food setting, in businesses for catered meetings, micro kitchens, or cafeterias, in universities for faculty meetings, conferences, or dining facilities, in organizations for meetings, events, or even just a group potluck. We also work with conferences, restaurants, and cafes. So here's the process. We start by analyzing your existing menu, then providing a menu of strategies to choose from. And once you've selected the strategies that you want to test, we design a pilot to fit your specific goals and food service environment. You will be in good company joining a growing number of companies and institutions implementing plant-based defaults such as Blue Bottle, Stumptown Coffee, Stanford, Harvard, and Northwestern. I'd love to work with you, so for more information, you can visit betterfoodfoundation.org or email me at kenzie@betterfoodfoundation.org. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope to hear from you soon. Thanks. Bye.